It was October 28, 2024, at Niagara Falls. The autumn air was crisp, and the roar of the water echoed through the night. Around 9 p.m., 33-year-old Keanti Means stood on Luna Island with her two children, 9-year-old Roman Rossman and 5-month-old Mecca. Means, what began as an ordinary evening, would soon turn into one of the most heartbreaking tragedies in Niagara's recent history. Keanti, a resident of Niagara Falls, New York, was known by many as a domestic violence counselor, someone who dedicated her life to helping others escape pain and danger. She had graduated from a school in nearby Buffalo and was described by those who knew her as kind, patient, and full of empathy. Friends said she adored her children, especially baby Mecca, born only months earlier. But behind her bright smile, Keanti was struggling with something few could see. Her cousin, Vieira Hamilton, later revealed that Keanti had been suffering from postpartum depression, a condition affecting thousands of mothers each year. Hamilton told reporters, "My cousin was silently fighting depression alone." In the weeks leading up to that night, Keanti's social media posts hinted at her pain. Under the name Diamond Scott, she wrote, "I wish someone would love me, because the man that's supposed to does not." In another, she pleaded, "Please leave me alone, I'm in love with my daughter's father. I want my family back." Friends say that after her relationship ended in late August, Keanti withdrew from many of the people closest to her. That evening on Luna Island, a small piece of land wedged between the American Falls and Bridal Veil Falls, Keanti made a devastating decision. Surveillance footage reviewed by investigators showed her walking toward the safety railing with her children by her side. She was carrying baby Mecca in her arms, while Roman followed close behind. Without hesitation, she climbed over the 3-foot-high barrier. Moments later, all three were swept into the raging Niagara River, which surges at nearly 750,000 gallons per second. Within seconds, the current pulled them over the edge, a 167-foot drop into the turbulent waters below. Witnesses called for help immediately. Emergency responders from the New York State Park Police, Marine Patrol, and underwater recovery units rushed to the scene. Helicopters circled overhead while drones scanned the river below, but the powerful current made recovery nearly impossible. Investigators later confirmed what many had feared, that the incident was intentional. Despite days of searching, the bodies of Keanti and her children were never found, likely carried far downstream by the relentless flow of the falls. The tragedy sent shockwaves through the community. Friends flooded social media with messages of disbelief and heartbreak. One wrote, "My heart is broken. Mental health is no joke." Another said, "I am sick to my stomach." She and her children were loved so deeply. Her cousin remembered her as a beautiful soul, full of wisdom and life, who loved her children and her family very much. The loss of Keanti, Roman, and Mecca became part of a grim statistic, one that counts over 5,000 fatalities at Niagara Falls since the 1850s. But their story stands apart, not as an accident, but as a haunting reminder of the silent battles people fight behind closed doors. It's a tragedy that underscores one painful truth. Mental health struggles can be invisible until it's far too late. If you or someone you know is struggling with depression, postpartum depression, or thoughts of self-harm, please reach out. In the US, you can call or text 988 for the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. You are not alone, and help is always available. Now, leaving the falls behind, our next story takes us to the Arctic, where a couple's fight for survival became a battle against nature itself. Quick interruption. If you're enjoying this video, why not hit that subscribe button? We're on a mission to hit 400,000 subscribers, and when we do, 4 lucky fans will win a free CreepyVids hoodie. Right now, 65.1% of you watching haven't subscribed yet. It's completely free, and your support helps us make even more awesome videos. So don't miss out. Subscribe now, and let's get back to the video. It was March 9th, 2016. The winds of the Bering Sea carried their familiar Arctic bite, sharp enough to cut through even the most careful plans. on that frozen expanse between Cape Prince of Wales, Alaska, and the ghosted outline of Chukotka, Russia, Belle and Aaron Torrance, both 26, were 4 days into their journey across the ice. They weren't thrill-seekers chasing danger. This was a mission built on precision, months of training, calculation, and endurance. Belle, a former collegiate rower turned ultramarathoner, had trained obsessively for the crossing. She'd spent months in altitude chambers, memorized ice fracture patterns, and even learned to sleep in snow pits carved chest deep into the tundra. Aaron had matched her in every step, meticulous, patient, and unwavering. Between them, they hauled 2 sleds packed with GPS units, rations, signal beacons, and military-grade survival gear. Every scenario had been planned, every variable accounted for, but the Arctic doesn't care for plans. It creates new variables faster than any human can react. By mid-morning, about 15 miles from the Alaskan coast, they encountered a jagged ridge of broken sea ice. Massive slabs piled into a wall stretching nearly half a mile in either direction. It looked manageable, but there was no way through. They decided to split up, each scouting one side for a possible route. Belle moved left, Aaron right. The rule was simple: stay within sight, regroup in 20 minutes. He watched her red parka moving against the endless white, a small spark of color in a world of frost. Then the wind shifted. Within minutes, the air thickened. Visibility dropped to nothing. The sky and ground became one blinding canvas of white. The wind roared across the ice, erasing tracks as fast as they were made. Aaron called her name into the gale. No answer. Then, faintly, a scream. He turned toward the sound and began moving, skiing low, head down, searching for her trail. For 20 agonizing minutes, he pushed forward through the storm. Then, through the blur of snow, he saw it, the tip of her ski jutting from the ice. He reached her seconds later. Belle had fallen through a narrow fracture, one leg trapped between 2 jagged slabs. Her right thigh was impaled on a vertical spike of blue ice. She was bleeding heavily, her face pale but conscious. Acting on instinct, Aaron removed his belt, fashioning a tourniquet. He dragged the sleds beside her, forming a barrier against the wind, and wrapped her in emergency blankets. He built a trench with their gear, desperate to shield her from the cold. He tried activating the beacon, but the signal failed. It needed line of sight, and the blizzard above them showed no mercy. Belle's breathing slowed. She drifted in and out, mumbling words he could barely hear. He pressed his parka around her, checking her pulse over and over, counting each faint beat as it grew slower, weaker. Hypothermia doesn't arrive like a storm. It creeps in quietly. Her shivering stopped. Her eyes closed, then opened less and less until they didn't open at all. When the sky finally cleared at dusk, Aaron triggered the beacon. It would be 8 hours before rescue arrived. When the Coast Guard found him, he was still crouched over her body, shielding her from the wind as if refusing to let the cold take what it already had. She was pronounced dead at the scene. A year later, Aaron returned to the Arctic, alone. He finished the route they had started, carrying her compass in his parka, and her wedding ring sealed in a small chest pocket close to his heart. Those who saw him say he didn't speak much that trip. He just walked, quietly, across the same ice that had taken everything from him. And when he reached the far shore, he looked back once at the endless white, where love, endurance, and the will to survive had all met the edge of the world. After a love story frozen on the surface, we move beneath the ice into Iceland's blue labyrinth, where beauty and danger are one and the same. It was March 16, 2017, a silent morning in the frozen heart of Iceland's Vatnajökull Glacier. The only sounds were the distant whisper of wind brushing across the peaks and the occasional crack of shifting ice deep within the glacier's body. 31-year-old Sojun Park stood at the mouth of a massive ice cave, adjusting his helmet beneath the pale Arctic light. Around him, the translucent blue walls shimmered like glass cathedrals, silent and sacred. In that frozen stillness, a tragedy was quietly waiting to unfold. Sojun had always been drawn to the edges of human comfort. Born in Busan, South Korea, and raised in Seattle, he lived a life defined by curiosity and motion. A man who blended cultures, languages, and landscapes into something uniquely his own. With a master's degree in glaciology, Sojun had built a career around his fascination with ice and the secrets it holds. He worked as a freelance alpine cartographer, mapping untouched terrain, capturing breathtaking drone footage of Arctic landscapes, and writing articles on the changing world of glaciers. For months, he and 3 close friends, Minji, Lucas, and Eli, had been planning an ambitious new expedition. Their goal: to explore a rarely documented section of the Vatnajökull's ice network, a labyrinth of corridors whispered about in online climbing forums and known only by name, the Blue Labyrinth. Their Icelandic guide, Halldór, had warned them that recent warming had created dangerous stress fractures throughout the lower chambers. If you go too deep, he told them, the ceiling might fall. He urged them to stay in the upper passages, but the lure of the uncharted, the pull of discovery, proved stronger than caution. As they descended into the glacier, light from their headlamps scattered against the walls, refracting in 1,000 shades of blue. The deeper they went, the quieter it became. Then, somewhere around 650 feet in, the silence broke. A low guttural groan rolled through the corridor, the sound of ancient ice shifting, nature's warning. But they kept moving. Sojun led the way across a shallow basin of slush water, his boots crunching on fragile ice. Then came the sound, a sharp crack, deep and violent, echoing like thunder. The ceiling split. Halldór screamed from the entrance. Eli ran. Lucas slipped, but recovered. Minji turned back, shouting Sojun's name. But Sojun was still mid-stride when a 10-foot slab of ice sheared loose from above. It struck his left leg and hip, pinning him waist-deep in the freezing water. The cave roared to life, groaning, collapsing in waves. Another block fell, shattering Sojun's helmet. Ice splintered like glass as Halldór reached the edge of the basin but couldn't cross. The water was churning too violently. For a brief moment, Sojun's eyes lifted toward the opening. His mouth moved once, then stilled. Within seconds, the cave fell silent again. Rescue teams arrived 4 hours later. Divers found Sojun's body wedged between ice and rock, still trapped in the pool that had become his grave. He had drowned beneath the crystal-clear water that had first drawn him in. The Blue Labyrinth was sealed permanently after the accident. Back in Seattle, news of Sojun's death reached his family before sunrise. His parents described him as a man who lived for beauty and truth, a soul who chased the edges of the earth not for fame, but for understanding. Every year since, his friends have returned to Iceland. They visit the glacier, but never speak of the cave. The wind still hums softly through the frozen corridors, carrying his story through the ancient ice, and somewhere deep beneath the glacier's surface, the Blue Labyrinth remains, silent, eternal, and mourning one of its own. And with that, we head to the open air above Montana, where a young man was chasing the sky and paying the price for one final shot. It was July 15, 2017, when 23-year-old Griffin McCrae made the fatal decision that would end his promising career as a freelance photographer and social media influencer. Standing 6'2" with an athletic build and a confidence that often crossed into recklessness, Griffin had spent 2 years building a modest but loyal following from his cramped apartment in Billings, Montana. His audience of 5,000 followers admired his daring photography, shots that often seemed to flirt with disaster. To his peers, Griffin's dismissive attitude toward safety had become legendary. He called it pushing limits. Others called it tempting fate. For weeks, he had become fixated on an abandoned radio tower he discovered on an urban exploration forum, a 200-foot structure deep in rural Montana, its rusted frame standing against the empty plains. Forum users had repeatedly warned that the tower was unstable, ready to collapse at any moment. But Griffin laughed off their concern, insisting he had scaled worse. The night before the climb, his girlfriend Belle Knox had begged him not to go. Her messages were desperate, her voice trembling, but Griffin brushed it off, already envisioning the viral moment, the shot that would finally push his engagement through the roof. At 5:30 a.m., he arrived at the remote site, carrying only a camera bag, tripod, and phone. Dressed in jeans, sneakers, and a tank top, he ignored every warning sign posted around the tower's base. His live stream began immediately, the lens panning upward to reveal the silhouette of the tower against the pale Montana sunrise. Comments flooded in, praise, nervous jokes, hearts, and wide-eyed emojis as Griffin began to climb. By 6:15, he was ascending steadily, pausing every 20 feet to take selfies and record updates for his followers. The rusted metal groaned beneath him, flakes of paint drifting down like ash. At 150 feet, he reached a narrow platform and set up his tripod. The light was perfect, soft, golden, cinematic, exactly what he had envisioned. He leaned over the railing, angling his camera for one final dramatic shot, his signature hanging pose. What he didn't realize was that a thin layer of dew had formed on the metal, turning the surface into a sheet of ice. As he shifted his weight, his sneaker slipped. Instinctively, he grabbed the railing, but the corroded metal gave way. The bar snapped, and Griffin fell. He plummeted 150 feet, hitting several support beams and cables on the way down. The impact shattered his helmet-mounted camera, but it continued to record until it hit the ground. The fall lasted just over 4 seconds. Emergency responders found him more than 2 hours later, after Belle called 911 when her messages went unanswered. Griffin's phone was still clutched in his hand. The screen displayed an unfinished Instagram caption that would never be posted. The coroner's report described massive internal bleeding, a fractured skull, a severed spinal cord, injuries no one could have survived. Griffin's final Instagram story had gone live seconds before his fall, a confident grin beneath the Montana sky, captioned simply, "The view is worth it." 3 months later, the county demolished the abandoned tower, citing Griffin's death as the reason for stricter enforcement of trespassing laws at unstable structures. His Instagram account remains online to this day, frozen at 5,000 followers. A digital monument to the price of risk and to a man who chased one final photograph too far. From a fall born of ambition to one born of revenge, we move into the woods, where childhood cruelty came full circle. It was a revenge story 20 years in the making. On August 15, 2018, Renee Mallister's childhood cruelty finally came full circle. At 31, she had everything: success, beauty, wealth, and influence. To her followers, she was a glamorous marketing executive with a perfect life, luxury vacations, designer handbags, and a growing online audience drawn to her charm. But behind that polished facade was something far darker. Renee was known to many as a narcissist in every sense of the word, incapable of empathy, intoxicated by control, and entertained by the suffering of others. What no one online knew was that beneath her curated perfection lay a history of cruelty that had destroyed lives. 2 decades earlier, at Camp Wildwood, Renee had been the ringleader of relentless bullying against a shy 12-year-old boy named Jordan Whitaker. What began as teasing quickly turned into systematic torment. Renee forced him to eat garbage, destroyed his belongings, and locked him in storage closets for hours. The humiliation left scars that would never fade. At one point, Jordan was so broken that he wrote a suicide note, a final cry for escape from the pain she caused. He never went through with it. But that note became a permanent reminder of how close she had come to ending his life. Years passed. The camp closed, left to rot in the woods, and Renee went on to thrive in the corporate world. Her cruelty rewarded rather than punished Jordan, now 33, lived with the damage she left behind. Decades of therapy had given him stability, but not peace. He worked quietly as a county property caretaker, maintaining abandoned land, including the same Camp Wildwood that had once destroyed his innocence. Every day, He walked through the ghostly ruins of the place that haunted his childhood. When Jordan learned through social media that Renee planned to return to the camp, using it as a backdrop for her nostalgic lifestyle photo shoot, he saw it as fate. After 20 years of silence, the past had finally come back to him. That afternoon, Renee arrived at 2 p.m., her designer boots crunching through the overgrown trails. She smiled for her camera, posing beside the cabins where she had once terrorized children. For her, it was content, just another aesthetic adventure. But for Jordan, it was retribution. He stepped out from the shadows of the old dining hall, clutching the same suicide note he had written as a boy. When he confronted her, Renee laughed, dismissing the memories as childish fun. She felt no remorse, no recognition of the pain she'd caused. That moment shattered whatever restraint Jordan had left. Years of rage, grief, and humiliation erupted all at once. He chased her through the crumbling campgrounds, through the cabins, the mess hall, and finally to the old rope course, where she had once pushed him from platforms for her amusement. Now the structure was a skeleton of rot and decay, frayed ropes and splintered beams. As she tried to climb away, Renee became tangled 30 feet above the ground, her movements frantic. Jordan stood below, watching as she screamed for help. He recited every cruel thing she had ever said, every act that had driven him toward the edge. Then, one of the rotted ropes snapped. Renee fell, slamming into the broken wooden supports below. A jagged post pierced her abdomen, another shattered her spine. She was still alive when she hit the ground, paralyzed, gasping, her eyes wide with terror. For the first time in her life, she experienced the same helplessness she had once inflicted on others. Minutes later, she bled out on the forest floor. Jordan left her there and returned the next morning, calling in the death as if he had just discovered her during his inspection. At first, investigators believed it was a tragic accident, another careless explorer killed by the camp's decay. But when they uncovered the connection between the two and learned of their shared past, the truth began to surface. Jordan Whitaker was arrested for murder. Some saw him as a monster, others saw him as justice made flesh, a victim who finally took back the power stolen from him long ago. But revenge, no matter how righteous it feels, always comes with a cost. From vengeance in the forest to murder at the table, this last story takes us into a quiet restaurant in Portland, where love and trust meet their bitter end. It was March 15, 2014, and the warm evening air carried the scent of blooming cherry blossoms through downtown Portland, Oregon. Inside the Riverside restaurant, soft jazz whispered from hidden speakers, while candlelight shimmered against crystal glasses and white linen. Couples laughed quietly over dinner, the glow of the room painting everything in warmth and calm. Among them sat Marcus and Elena Rivera, two people who seemed to have it all. Marcus, 34, was a newly minted partner at a respected accounting firm, a man whose long nights and relentless ambition had finally paid off. Across from him sat Elena, 31, the head nurse at Portland General Hospital, radiant in the blue dress he'd given her for their anniversary. Their usual corner table overlooked the Willamette River, the same spot where they'd shared their first date, and years later, their engagement dinner. They had spent 7 years building the kind of marriage others envied, one forged through long work hours, student debt, and the quiet promise that they'd make it together. With recent promotions, their dream of a house with a yard finally felt within reach. They were even talking about starting a family, baby names, a golden retriever, and a trip to Italy to celebrate new beginnings. Marcus had arranged everything perfectly. The restaurant staff knew them by name. Their waiter, David, had served them for years, always admiring how they seemed untouched by the stress of the world. Marcus even ordered Elena's favorite dessert, a rich chocolate souffle, to be served with a single candle, just like on their wedding night 7 years before. At 8:47 p.m., they shared their appetizer, the restaurant's signature crab cakes. They laughed between bites, teasing each other about Marcus's last attempt at cooking dinner. Everything about the night was effortless, perfect, until it wasn't. A few minutes later, Marcus shifted in his chair, frowning. A wave of nausea rolled through his stomach. Elena reached across the table, touching her own abdomen. "I feel lightheaded," she whispered. At first, they dismissed it, maybe the wine or the richness of the food. But by 8:55, their symptoms turned severe. Marcus gripped the edge of the table, gasping for air as sharp cramps twisted through his chest and abdomen. Elena's face had turned pale, her breathing shallow. Her nursing instincts recognized what her mind couldn't yet process. This wasn't indigestion. This was something far worse. The waiter rushed to their table just as Marcus collapsed forward, choking. Elena tried to stand, her body trembling violently. Foam began to form at the corners of her mouth as her vision blurred. Glasses shattered, chairs scraped, and screams echoed through the restaurant. Diners froze in horror as both Marcus and Elena convulsed violently before slumping over, hands still reaching for each other. When paramedics arrived 6 minutes later, the scene was chaos: overturned tables, spilled wine, and two motionless bodies lying side by side. Despite advanced life-saving efforts, Marcus and Elena were pronounced dead at 9:34 p.m. at Portland General Hospital, the same place Elena had worked for nearly a decade. Toxicology reports confirmed the unthinkable: cyanide poisoning traced back to the crab cakes they had shared. Detectives discovered that the poison had been deliberately introduced into their meal, a targeted act of revenge by a former restaurant employee. The man had blamed Marcus for reporting financial misconduct at his previous workplace, an action that had cost him his job. The Riverside restaurant closed permanently within a week. In the months that followed, their families founded the Rivera Foundation, an organization dedicated to promoting workplace safety, ethics, and accountability, the very values Marcus had lived by. Their story became one of Portland's most heartbreaking modern tragedies. Two lives intertwined by love, ended by vengeance. Now that was all for today, folks. If you enjoyed these horrifying clips, click to see more on the video on screen.